Thanks for having me.
Remind us what drove the loonie down earlier this year.
Well, I mean, it's obviously the threat of tariffs, and there's a lot of global growth concerns as well, some domestic concerns in Canada, but by and large, it's the tariff story, and hopefully we'll get a little bit of clarity on that next week.
Next week, and maybe even some of that today, we had the dollar move up above the 70-cent mark yesterday. I know it's more of a psychological move than anything else, but do we know what people or what the market was reacting to yesterday?
Yeah, well, I think the market is sort of going back and forth on tariffs, right? Coming out of the weekend, we heard some good signs, and we've been hearing a lot of good signs. So you've had the Canadian dollar get up or get down to about 67.5 cents, and it's bounced now back up above 70. And the market has been telling you, okay, this isn't going to be as bad as we thought. And they're seeing some reports about that. On the weekend, there was one about Canada will be at the lowest rate of tariffs. Trump himself saying Canada's done a lot on fentanyl. So happy with that progress. So kind of teeing up an off-ramp there. Today we had a report saying that VAT taxes or something like Canada's HST won't be considered or will barely be considered in setting tariff rates. So everything's kind of lining up for some good news for Canada. And I think the market is starting to lean into that as much as it can in regards to anything to do with Trump and his unpredictability.
Okay, so we have some confusion around the auto sector. The Canadian auto sector got the reprieve for a month. As under the umbrella of CUSMA, everything under CUSMA was okay, but that deadline expires again April 2nd. Donald Trump saying today he's going to announce some auto tariffs. Do you have any expectation or any idea of what to expect at 4 o'clock? And do you expect the dollar to react sort of quickly afterwards?
Yeah, the details on all the reporting we've seen have been pretty scant, but there was one detail that came out in a report saying that auto parts would be excluded or were likely to be excluded because everything can always change. And if you look at Canadian and U.S. trade in finished vehicles, it's about equal. So that could balance things out. Of course, if the tariffs are only going one way, it begs retaliation from Canada. But if you look at things like the shares of GM and Ford, they're not down very much today. And that indicates to me that these tariffs are probably not going to be directed, at least at Canada and Mexico. But again, it's very tough to imagine where they will be directed. But I can imagine a scenario where Europe is the main target. Europe has already indicated that it's willing to remove a lot of its tariffs. And I imagine they could announce that very shortly, and then the U.S. takes theirs off, and everything kind of moves along, and especially if we don't get implementation on auto tariffs right now or right away, which I think is pretty difficult to do anyway. So I think they're teeing up again some off-ramps there. It looks always darkest before dawn, and that's really I think the scenario right now in tariffs in general.
Do you think China could be targeted by the tariffs? They've already looked at EVs coming in from China and moved on that, but could there be more for China in the announcement today?
Yeah, I think there will be. I mean, they teed up this Venezuela oil announcement, and I think that gives them an angle to hit China with another 25%. Chinese autos are already out of the picture. They're tariffed at 100%, so I don't see that. But when you look at the big picture, right now we're trying to find out what's priced into the market in terms of tariffs in general, rather than will they, won't they. So if you look at a lot of surveys of investors, it's around 10%, 9 or 10% globally, and around 50% on China. So we're already about 30% on China, so we'd see something ratcheted up there, and then on the rest of the world. And then if you look at market-based things like US CPI or even the dollar, it's tough to suss out even that much inflation there. A lot of people, when you talk to them, they're talking 25%, 20. I think these numbers are going to be 10, sub 10, or even sub 5 on somewhere like Canada, because reciprocally, Canada, that would be the best thing, true reciprocal tariffs, because on a trade-weighted basis, Canadian tariffs on U.S. goods are about 1.1%. So it's really negligible. It's hard to imagine we'll go that low because Trump is trying to raise money, but I also think he doesn't want retaliation. So I don't know if maybe 5 is that sweet spot, but it is really, really tough to game out. And a lot of people are going through these same sort of machinations in their head. And I think ultimately you get to the conclusion, we just have to wait and see.
Yeah. Given what you think will happen, which will be a lower rate rather than a higher rate, and this kind of might be wrapped up sooner than later. I'm wondering what to expect for the dollar, the Canadian dollar ahead. What are people expecting for the next year?
Yeah, I think, expectations they're really scrambled. You were just talking about the Bank of Canada, for instance. They have some terrible survey data. We saw some spending today, some actual card spending data from Canada. It was good. And this is the dynamic in a lot of places. So I think ultimately if we can lift this quickly, these sentiment numbers are going to come back quickly. The spending will hold up. Global growth will be strong. We'll start to look at some of the positives in the world economy. Canada will probably spend coming out of the election. And we have just a lot of tailwinds then starting to gather, and we can get down to something like 67, 66 cents even in an upside scenario when we get some certainty. Now, hoping for certainty in this political environment is probably asking a lot. So I think it'll be a slow grind to get there. But things can turn around pretty quickly in this environment.
We will keep a watch on that. Adam Button is a currency analyst at Forex Live. Adam, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.